to their programs now if you would like to. They don't have to, but we have a children's program for primary age children that runs upstairs in this time, and they will head up there for this time and then join at the end again. I want to invite someone up the front, Christine. Christine is a long-time member of our community, and she coordinates all what we call our local connections ministries. So all our ministries that have a connection with our local community and help people in the local community to engage with our community, who understand who we are as a church. It's often a first point of contact for many people in our community that know nothing of Jesus. And Christine coordinates those ministries, so thank you for coming and sharing it with us a little bit.
Pleasure. Thank you, Steve. Yes, I have the delightful task of overseeing the 5 ministries that run in this church during the week so that hardly anybody else sees what's happening. You might be surprised to know that over 100 people walk through these doors during the week to come to our ministries. And so I just wanted to talk about them because I think we need to celebrate them more. And that's my task today. So can I quickly run through with the ministries? Artful is run by Avril, and she does that on a Wednesday afternoon. That's special art for young adults. And May Chu runs English Plus for people who want to improve their English. That's on a Friday morning. Joy, Just Older Youth, is run by Raymond Wong and his team. And that's run on Wednesday mornings. That's run once a month. And they put a lot of work into running something fantastic on each month for the seniors in our community. Then there's Maggie, who heads up Mainly Music. So that's a ministry for young families, very young families, many of them. We accept newborn children, and they don't know they're here, but their mums do. And so it's often the mums who need to get out of the house. So that's that. And table tennis is run by Leo Cheng, and that's on a Tuesday evening. So these people are generally not churchgoers, and that's important to remember, I think. Today I just want to say a few things about Mainly Music, because we're on a recruitment drive for next year. Some of us, especially me, are getting old. So we need to reinvigorate Mainly Music with younger people. Mainly Music runs on Wednesdays during term. It's 10 till 11:30. Young mums come along and bring their kids, and we have such a fun time. We would have 60 people in that hall usually on a Wednesday morning. If you like playing with little kids, and if you like perhaps helping them with their craft that they do, and if you like chatting to young mums, and if you like singing fun songs, and maybe preparing some morning tea, then Wednesday mornings, if you're free, could be for you. Could you serve in this ministry as an act of worship to our great God? I just want to tell you about the special events we've got coming up for this term at Mainly Music. Water Play Day, obviously it happens out there. We wait for a lovely sunny day, and we all get pretty wet, and I do all the different colours, like one colour and another colour make a third colour, and so my hands come out of that day always very colourful. So then we've got the Mainly Music Christmas party. That's on the last day of Mainly Music, on Wednesday the 13th of December. And we always have here a lovely kids' Christmas That's on a Sunday morning, and that's on the 17th of December at 9 a.m. All the Mainly Music families are invited, which is why we want a lot of people to come from GBC to welcome them, because the Mainly Music kids participate in that. So that's one way in which you can come along and see what happens here at Gordon Baptist. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for the way that you serve there, and encourage you to have a chat to Christine. Chat to her about it more. You don't have to be young to serve in this. Mainly Music is full of young mums. There's some dads that come along. There's grandparents that bring their grandchildren along. So I encourage you to have a chat to her. Or if one of those other ministries stuck out to you and you want to get involved, come and talk to us. This is what it's about, for you to serve in our community with these people who are coming through our doors very freely. And so I encourage you to think about that too. One other thing I just want to highlight to you is our series planning meeting is happening tomorrow night. So it's tomorrow night here, 7 till 9 p.m. You might say, what's the series planning meeting? At this, we give you an outline of where we're going in terms of our Sunday teaching. So we're going to look at our December teaching, our January teaching, and our teaching in February and March at tomorrow night, just because Christmas gets crazy. So we're going to go through that whole stretch where we're going with our teaching. And then after I've given you an outline of that, we're going to split off into 3 groups. One of those groups is going to be led by Winnie, our new communications manager. And this is really going to be a little bit of a feedback session where some people can give some reflection on where they feel things are at as a whole church and what we might want to start, stop, or keep. So that Winnie will lead that. Then we'll have a group that looks at our Sunday gatherings and all that's involved with our Sunday gatherings, from our music team and songs we might sing for each series, to design materials, to set design stuff if we want to do some stuff that's connected with the series itself, to other creative elements that we might incorporate into a gathering, how we do communion, how we might pray with one another. These types of ideas that we can think about what it means for us to gather on a Sunday. And then the third group will think about how over these time we will operate as a community, what community events we will have that help to foster a sense of community, and how we can plan for those for us to be a church community together. So those 3 groups. So I encourage you to come along. You might just be curious. Come along and hear about what we're going in terms of teaching. Tomorrow night here, 7 o'clock. Love you to be here. I'm going to read from the Bible before John comes and speaks. I brought my old school Bible because I didn't think I'd be able to read it up there, but I can, so I might just read it from up there. We're reading all of chapter 6 of 2 Samuel, if you want to follow along. There's also booklets around it. I can't see many booklets, but some people like to write notes in booklets. There's waving a booklet. If you would like a booklet, then we should have some out in the desk out there to write some notes. David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people who were with him from Baale-Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of Yahweh of hosts, and who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. And Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. And David and all the house were celebrating before Yahweh with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put out his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Uzzah. And God struck him down there because of his error. And he died there beside the ark of God. And David was angry because Yahweh had broken out against Uzzah. And that place is called Perez Uzzah to this day. And David was afraid of Yahweh that day. He said, "How can the ark of Yahweh come to me?" So David was not willing to take the ark of Yahweh into the city of David, but David took it aside to the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. And the ark of Yahweh remained in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months, and Yahweh blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. And it was told King David, Yahweh has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when those who bore the ark of Yahweh had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And David danced before Yahweh with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of Yahweh with shouting and with the sound of the horn. And the ark of Yahweh came into the city of David. Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before Yahweh. And she despised him in her heart. And they brought in the ark of Yahweh and set it in its place, inside the tent that David has pitched for it. And David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of Yahweh of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house. And David returned to bless his household. But Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, "How the king of Israel honored himself today, uncovering himself today before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself." And David said to Michal, "It was before Yahweh who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of Yahweh. And I will celebrate before Yahweh. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor." And Michal, the daughter of Saul, had no child to the day of her death.
Steve? Interesting passage. What do you reckon? Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you. Good to be here. A box. A box is a really useful implement. It can be wonderfully helpful to contain or transport the most valuable of treasures, but it can also be dangerously limiting when it contains things or stops things being connected, which should be. Church life can be boxed. It can be really helpful that we separate this time and space to focus and give attention to God, but it can be incredibly damaging if it stops us thinking about other things in our world. As we come to this passage today, I'm sure that you are thinking, as we read this story about ancient Jerusalem, about what's happening in Jerusalem at the moment. What do we do about that? I don't know that it's helpful that every time we come together that we make comments about events happening in our world, that they dictate what we do, because if we're honest, there's always stuff happening in our world that needs reflection and response. But nor should we cut ourselves off from that. We need to deal with those realities. We mustn't live safely in our cotton wool of spirituality, cut off from the realities of things around us. What I wanted to do today, I guess, is just say, can we put that issue in a box for the moment? But I think we do need to speak about how we respond to some really horrible events that are taking place there and in other places. Last Sunday, we were talking about these issues, and I was speaking about Israel. And I'd come and I'd prepared what I wanted to say, and I made some comments about stuff. But I had no idea on the Sunday what was happening on the Saturday. And then I went home and watched the news, and I thought, oh my goodness, I wonder if people were listening thinking I'm making comments about what's happening there. I had no idea what was going on there. So I got really anxious, or, was I saying something offensive or stupid, or, if I did, please forgive me. I guess that's my excuse. But it made me think, well, isn't that often what we do in church, though? That we get consumed with our little interior events, things that we think are important, but there are much bigger things happening in our world. And we want to be aware of becoming irrelevant to those things. And I think church is often marginalised by people in our society as having no relevance to the big stuff that happens in our world. This passage, the whole Bible, says we do have relevance. If you are a follower of Jesus, you think that Jesus is relevant to everyone. That's why you want to share your faith. That everyone can be helped by belonging to the community of his people, by church. That's why we want to connect with other people. But we must beware of then, once we're here, looking inward, being distant, boxed in from other things, or even worse, protecting ourselves from those difficult realities. I think it's a warning that we need to keep reflecting on. Our gospel is much bigger than that. Our culture says to us, think of yourself. And we can approach our spirituality like that. We can even say our message, our gospel is about me and Jesus, my personal relationship with Jesus. That's not the biblical focus. The biblical focus is that God is interested in everything, all that he has made. All of creation he wants to transform as he brings his kingdom. All the nations of the earth, every aspect of life. It's not an either or. It's not that God isn't interested in us in individuals or relates to us individually, but it's about our focus. If our focus is just on me and Jesus, my gospel becomes small and I become irrelevant to the world. Rather, my life needs to be in response to God's bigger story, his bigger picture. It's not either or, it's about a question of priority, of focus. And if I think it's just about me, when you come here, you're just coming for yourself. Meet my needs, encourage me, give me a nice feeling, give me something to get me through the week. And church easily becomes a factory to do that, to have these spiritual experiences. God has a much bigger and more wonderful plan for us. And he says, this is what I'm doing in the world. I want you to respond and live your life in the light of that. Because I am bringing my kingdom to this troubled world. And I want you to have a part in that. And that's what this story is about today. It is about private realities and individual responses, but it's also about public issues. Most of this story is done out in public. It's about two things. It's about religion and worship. Religion and worship. And I want to use those two words in their broadest levels. Religion is I guess, what we receive. Our beliefs, our behaviours, our way of belonging together. That's our religion. Everyone has a religion. What you believe, how you behave, how you belong to others is your religion, whether there's a God in that religion or not. Our worship is how we express. So religion is what we receive. Worship is how we express. Not just singing and reading the Bible, but our whole lives, the Bible says, are an expression of our worship to God. What is worthwhile? What do I live for? What are my values? That's our worship to God. So I want to see how those two things fit together, because in this passage it's about what difference does it make in the world. This is a complicated passage, and I wrestled, how do I box it up? Because there's some pretty weird stories going on here and lots of themes that we could explore. I don't want to make it too neat, because I think it's often when you put things together and they rub up, you learn stuff. But I do want to package it for you, hopefully, in a way that is helpful. In lots of ways, wisdom is about having a balance, isn't it? And I think this passage gives us two opposite extremes. And they're placed next to each other so that we can say, that extreme is dangerous that way, and that extreme is dangerous that way. Sometimes it's getting the middle ground that is what you need to do. Aristotle's golden mean, or lots of other philosophers had that idea. Balance is wise. But also, there is, I think, a truth that says everything in moderation, including moderation. Oscar Wilde said that, so did Buddha. Lots of people have said that. Sometimes you do need to be extreme to go all out. And moderation is fear and limitations. So which is it, John? That's what this passage is wrestling with. That's what we're trying to learn together. The behaviour of these characters, God, David, Uzzah, Michal, however you want to say those words, say to us, here is a picture of life. And I want us to try and pick three little things. I've got three little containers for us to think about. The first one is this. Religion, in that broader sense, is a box of presents. And I hope you pick up my pun. A box of presents. Either, and this sounds complicated, but don't be put off by long words, either unifying dynamically or centralising controllingly through the public impact of our worship of God. Now, that's a long sentence, and hopefully by the end unpack and you'll understand what I mean by that. This passage asks us to think about what is going on here. Did you have that response as you listened to Steve read? What am I to make of this? Here is the first thing I want us to think about. If you look at the first 4 verses of that passage, we see them bringing in a box. Fancy word, ark. What's this box? This ark, if you were here last year, we did the Exodus story, was a symbol of God's presence with his people. During that Exodus, they construct this wooden box and overlay it with gold. There's the cherubim that sit on the top. It's like the God's footstool. You know, when you go home and you put up, you used to call them a puff, but you probably can't say that word anymore. You put your feet up on, and you relax, and you're sitting up top. Well, this is God's footstool from his throne. It represents him being with his people because he's enthroned on this. He's the king. These cherubim point to that reality. It's a symbol of his presence. Not that he's boxed and contained in this little box, but it says, I am really with you. Inside that box, what's in there? It's not empty. There's the stone tablets of the 10 words, or 10 commandments as we often call them, where Moses wrote instructions of how God's people were to live. So it's God's instructions. There is a jar of the manna, where for 40 years God sustained them, so it's remembering God sustains us. And there's Aaron's staff, the rod that he used by which the people were delivered and saved. So it's a picture of God present and kingly, instructing, providing for, and saving his people. And that's why they want this box, for what it represents. Notice who goes to get the box. 30,000 soldiers. Now, if you're in those days waging a military campaign, that's a rather large group of guys to get together. They're going to pick up a box. What's David doing as he instructs this? He's saying this is a highly significant thing in our national public life. And I want everyone to see this parade coming past and respond to it. It's a little bit like, when we have our Anzac Day parade or coronation parades, there's the people who march down and the whole community comes out and gets drawn up into the excitement. That's what David is doing. But how are they getting this box? Look at verse 3. They get a new cart to say it's fresh and holy and untainted, drawn by oxen that will carry this little box. It's about 4 foot by 2.5 foot. It's not a huge thing. It's not enormous. But here's the problem. When they were given instructions about how to make this box, you can see it on the side here, they were told it had to have rings through which you put poles to carry the box. And there were very clear instructions. This is the only way you are to transport this thing. The priests must pick it up and carry it. No one is otherwise to touch it, nor to look into it. Very explicitly in Numbers chapter 4, if you do that, you will die. David perhaps thinks, innovation, new technology. We've got the cart and the ox now. Let's go with that. They're much more efficient. But that's the source of problems. This box has been through a troubled history. It was made and brought in the Exodus, but as they came into the land, the Philistines, 30 years before this event, had attacked Israel and taken the box. They'd lost it. But it caused enormous problems to the Philistines. They took it into their temple, and their god Dagon kept falling on his face in front of the box. It was a bit embarrassing for their gods. And people were getting sick and troubled, and so they took it out and said, we'll just take it away. And it continued to cause problems to whatever town they took it to, so they abandoned it and said, Israelites, come and get your box back. We don't want it anymore. And so they started to transport it on a cart and had exactly these problems. People were dying. And so they left it in the home of a guy called Abinadab. And for there, in that home, has been sitting for 20 years under the watchful eye of his family. His son, Eliezer, was looking after it. You can read this in 1 Samuel chapters 4 to 6. And then it seems his two younger brothers, Uzzah, or Uzzah, however you want to say it, and Ahio have taken over. But it seems all along the journey they have forgotten their history. They will make no connection to what happened yesterday in how we respond to our history, but they had certainly forgotten their history, and it causes them problems. Abinadab lives about 15 kilometres west of Jerusalem, and so David goes to get this box. Why? If you were here last week, David has been doing new things as he becomes the king. He's solidifying his rule, his kingship under his unity of all the tribes. The new city, Jerusalem, is going to be the capital. He's got his palace. He's got his household to build his dynasty. He's securing the borders of his country. And this is the crowning achievement, because this symbolises and represents all of that. That as I am king, I'm only king because God is our king. And this is what the ark represents. Does that make sense? This is why he's doing it. Is he doing it for religious reasons or political reasons? I think he's doing it for both. They're not so easily separated, especially in a theocracy. What's David's inner motivation? We don't know, and we're always left with these questions about David. It's ambiguous, his motivation. He's saying the focus of religious and political life now is in Jerusalem under my control. He's centralising the sanctuary. Positively, you can say he's unifying people together, that we will all worship in the same ways as one people together. Negatively, you can say he's controlling. He's bringing power to himself, and he's using religious symbols for that political gain. Subsequent history, the other tribes rebel against what David does. They want their local sanctuaries, and they secretly keep setting up, and it causes great tension as you read through the story. They don't want this centralised in one temple, in one place. It's a problem. And I think that ambiguity runs through what happens as things take place. This symbol of God's power can unite people, but it can also divide. It can be used to justify power. And I think that's the lesson for us to think about from this part of the story. What is the connection between our public faith and our public experience of God's kingdom power? How do we negotiate those two things? Because it's tricky. Complex situations in our world. How is God's rule and authority to be experienced? Can we centralise and impose? Or can we unify around an idea and an experience? It's hard to do. But that's what this passage is getting us to think about in a public experience of God's presence. The box is carried along, but then there is a stumble. And we see in the next event, the second of my little containers, that religion is a box of power, bringing either death or dancing to our public worship of God. There's, I think, a really stunning contrast to what happens in the next bit of passage, and I'm not going to read it to you, but maybe you can see some of the words or you can find it in your own Bible, but looking from verses 5 down to 19. There is a group of people who are responding to what David is doing. As the procession of 30,000 men lead, noisily singing, they've got the band, they're crashing cymbals, they're blowing trumpets, they've got the castanets, they're making a heck of a lot of noise. There's jubilation, there's joy, there's excitement. It's visible, it's concrete, it's physical, it's corporate. This is their worship of God, isn't it? And people in the neighbouring fields get caught up into this experience. And they come along happily until the cart stumbles on the road. And Uzzah, who'd been left in charge, does what we would all do. You see a stack of chairs about fall, you put your hand out. You see a little kid about to trip, you pick him up, or an old person, dottery, you grab him by the arm, and he does the same thing. Puts his hand on the ark because we don't want it falling off the cart. Oh, crisis averted. Excellent. Well done, Uzzah. Probably no one even noticed, but he saved the day. Except suddenly the noise is silenced. The cart stops. Because there, down by the wheel, is the dead body of this man. What do I make of that experience? Verse 7, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. Why? What has he done that is so terrible? Because in this story, we've seen people do, I think, far worse things than this, than touch some religious relic. People have been murdering and pillaging and raping and burning towns to the ground, and God hasn't done a thing. What is going on here? Is this proportion? How is this not overreaction? Why does God respond to Uzzah in this way? Does it make you a little bit anxious or a bit confused? It certainly does to me. I think, what is this God's character? So you've got a temper problem. How do I understand this? I guess to cut to the chase, this is how I understand it. Yes, God is holy, and we've got to be careful with holy things, but I don't think that's what it's about. The whole ark represents that God is present in power. That's what the whole thing means. And what Uzzah is doing is saying, I need to look after God. I need to protect God. I can't trust that he can look after himself. And that at heart is the most damaging thing that can happen in the body politic, is that when we have to think we've got to look after and control and manage God in front of other people. It's not a reflection of worship, it's a reflection of fear. God can't look after himself. And God speaks strongly against that and says, believe that I am here and can look after myself. If you go into life thinking we've got to protect God and his name, because that's what was on the ark, then it's going to cause disaster in the community. And you see that around the world today in different religious communities, where people say we need to protect God and his name from people who behave the wrong way. So we have things like blasphemy laws, or if you wear the wrong clothes and don't get your head covering right, or you say offensive things, or you shop on the wrong day, or whatever else you sing, or you dance, or you smoke, or you drink, or whatever else it is. That we have to somehow control people and protect God because you're offending God. And God says, don't protect me. I don't need your help. Who do you think you are? Like the whole concept of protecting God. Just put that into your mind. And I think God has this strong reaction. He's angry. Who of us likes being controlled by others? Why would God want to be controlled by others? It's incredibly dangerous for everybody else. And it was clear. He'd explained, you touch this, you do this, it's game over. The instructions were plain. But I guess it still raises that question, like, oh, he's a bit fickle, this guy, this God. If I get something wrong, is he going to zap me too? Do you have that sense? I think God is untamed and unpredictable. We shouldn't put God in a little box. But I think the long story says we can trust him. Fearing the Lord is not, fearing Yahweh is not fearing like Uzzah feared him. It's having the opposite regard that he is free and powerful and can do as he wants to do. That's not what it means to fear. And that's important because if you have this attitude about God, it shapes how you relate with other people. It brings a public expression of faith that is damaging and controlling. If you control God, you will control other people. And God does not want that. That's not how he wants us to respond to him or get other people to respond to him. it's not a way that brings peace and joy. There is a way where we respond to God out of who He is, that is trusting Him. And that allows people to respond in their way, in freedom, even if they make bad choices. John writes really well to explain how those two things get together. The story continues on about God's presence with us, and it shows something very different. We've seen and testified that the Father has sent His Son to be the Saviour of the world. So this story of God's presence continues on in the person of Jesus. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God. So God's presence is with us. So we've come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love. And whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. This is the characteristic of God's presence because of who he is and his character. By this is love perfected in us, made complete, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment. Because as he is, so also are we in this world. We love and live as he does. And here's the key point. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love others, I think it means here, because he first loved us. And if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must also love his brother. John says, do not be fearful that God's going to get you in the neck. He loves you. That's what the cross proves, Paul says in Romans 5. It's a demonstration of God's love. But also, do not be fearful of how other people live, says John. Those two things are connected. We give freedom. We don't control others. We love as God loves, even if people choose the wrong. And it's complicated in a society. We do have laws and boundaries, but it talks about a different heart in how we respond. Does that make sense? Clarence, please do. Yes. Are we supposed to do something if someone desecrates? I would say no. If we are harming other people, those whom we can see, yes, there is a place for police forces and justice and criminal institutions and the rest. But if people are saying rude things about God, Monty Python movies or whatever you want to get upset about, people can get on their song and dance soapbox and say, this is terrible, you're blaspheming, you're doing things against God. I think that's a very slippery slope. Because that's not how, we don't see God intervening when people do that. And I think that's the lesson from this strange story. God, by this overreaction, is saying, you don't need to look after me, I can look after myself. Do not think you can control me. And therefore do not make other people respond to me in that way. Now, is it nice and polite to say rude and offensive things about people's faith or religion? No, it's not. But I don't think that should come with a punishment in terms of how some societies operate. We can be sad, we can be grieved that people respond to God in that way, but we don't control them. That's what I take from this story. Does that answer your question? Any other comments or questions on this point? We've got one more box and then we can maybe come back and ask and answer any question. All right. I guess from this point I want us to think about, well, what's my emotional response after you read this story? Because some of us do go through life thinking God's going to get me because I'm doing some things wrong. We can get frightened of God. It's to do with punishment, says John. You're worried that God's going to punish you. And so you're very insecure. You walk around feeling guilty or ashamed all the time. You're nervous. I'm not good enough. That's not the message that we find, the core testimony, says John, in the message of Jesus. It's a demonstration of God's love and acceptance of us, which then goes on to transform us and make us like him. that okay? Nice little bit. How does David respond to all this? I think this is fascinating. David was angry because the Lord had burst forth against Uzzah. And that place is called Beras Uzzah. It means bursting forth. You know, when you get a burst water pipe, and psh, he says, well, this is what we're going to call this place. This is where God's anger came out. But David has the same reaction. It's the same word, the same root word in Hebrew for the wrath there. He gets angry at God's anger. And he says, how the heck am I going to do this? What am I supposed to do, God? How can I get the ark? How can the ark of the Lord come to me? I'm afraid of the Lord that day, verse 9. This bold man, David, is now afraid of God. He's confounded. He's stuck. He doesn't know what to do. And when we fear God in that sense of being afraid, we become paralyzed. And so for 3 months, David's at home scratching his head. How do I get the ark here? What do I do? It's not working. He goes home pouting. The box is left with Obed-Edom, the Gittite. He's a foreigner. He's a foreigner. Maybe from Gath. Maybe when David was up there, he made friends with this guy and they leave it in his house. But the presence of the ark brings blessing to his house. Imagine that, you've got this nuclear reactor sitting in your lounge room. I wonder how he feels about it. But it brings him blessing. We aren't told what sort of blessing, but obviously something people could see. Maybe his crops going super well, or who knows what it was. And David thinks, I must get this box. And then the penny drops. We've done it the wrong way. Sometimes we think we know better than God. I can make this much more efficient, God. You're wasting your time here. I know a better way. But then maybe David remembers, well, what is the way that we should have done it? And so they decide to bring up the ark of God. And if you look at verse 13, at last they are bearing it. They're carrying it. And David says, right, let's try this. And they go 6 steps carrying it. No one's been zapped. And so he says, you beauty. And so he makes a sacrifice. It's working. And you can just feel the relief and the joy that he has. Oh, we're going to do it. Doesn't mean every 6 steps he sacrificed, but it means he just did it straight away. And he dances. And I really want to pay attention to that, verse 14. David is just free in his response to God. He's bodily, he's expressive, he's joyful, he's uninhibited. He does not box himself in. He just expresses with his whole being and all his might that God is good. Oh. And I think there's the whole crowd with noisy cymbals and the musical instruments worshipping God that way. He dances around. He instructs people, the psalmist, to let Israel be glad in his maker, let the children of Zion rejoice in their king, let them praise his name with dancing, making melody to him with tambourine and lyre. Praise him with the tambourine and dance. Praise him with strings and pipe. Why are we so frightened of physical expression? Why are we in churches so solemn and serious, as if that's what God wants from us? Why do we do that? Why do we tell off children when they ride their bike through church, as we had this morning? Why do we get cranky when people want to lift up their hands or dance or whatever? I've heard people in our church criticising others for doing those things. Or thinking, it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? Who are we worried about, God or ourselves? It's all about our comfort when we restrict the behaviour of other people. We want decorum. We want moderation. David has none of that. He lets it all loose. So very clearly my invitation to you is just be yourself. You don't have to do anything. You want to sit while we sing? Sit. You want to stand? You want to dance? You want to jump? Go for it. Be considerate of your neighbours, but don't be constrained. Express joyfully what is within you with all your might. But I love it also that David starts again, and maybe that's another message perhaps for you sitting here. He stuffed it up before, Now he's got it right, and so he's rejoicing again. Sometimes we stuff it up, and you can think, right, that's it, I'm over, I'm done. Here is a model, an example of starting again. And God goes with him again. Just remember that next time you make a mess of your Christian journey, it's not over. You can start again. But not everyone's feeling happy, and this is our last bit of the story, our third bit of the box, this box of power. Religion is also a box of division, either blessing in freedom or abasing in dishonour by our public worship of God. The writer in this bit is so artful, so clever in how they've constructed the story. You'll notice that as it goes along, verse 16, we have a description. Then it breaks to the action, and then it comes back to the first scene. So Michal, or Michael, whatever you want to call her, hears all the horn blowing and the cymbals and the dancing and the screaming and chanting in the streets, and she looks out her window to see what is going on. If you know the story, you remember the last time she was looking out a window at her husband. It was when he was jumping over the wall to escape her father's death squad. Here she watches out the window, but there's not love, there's not help, there's hatred, there's bitterness, there's scorn and anger in her. Anger is the theme that runs through this passage. In verse 16, the narrator tells us what Michael's feeling, but not why. And so we're left with her at the window imagining. What is she feeling now as the next verses come and we get the description of the scene? What is she thinking of her husband? The explanation is delayed. Is she now jealous of him that is enjoying himself while she sits alone like a prisoner in the palace? Is she now bitter in pain? Because remember, when she left David, she married another man, Paltiel, who was forcibly, she was removed from. Is her allegiance actually now back with her father Saul? She's constantly called through this passage the daughter of Saul. She's not called David's wife. Is that an indication of where her allegiance lies? Is she bitter at his mistreatment of her? And certainly he does mistreat her appallingly. She is the least favoured in his harem, and he's collecting wives and concubines like any ancient despot did. Is she revolted at the spectacle he's making of himself as he jumps around? And is she feeling shame that this all rebounds on her? What's going on? I think it's a combination perhaps of all of those things. David has this public celebration. They feast, they joy, they dance, and then he comes home to bless his family. And he gets a very different response. She can't even wait for him to get inside. She goes out to the driveway and lets him have it in front of all the neighbours. And her words drip with sarcasm. This is the first time in the whole story that we have any dialogue between the two. It's only just been a description of the events. And it's quite telling what comes out. The sarcasm. When the ark was first captured, back in 1 Samuel chapter 4, it said that the glory, the honour, the kavod of Israel is gone. And she uses that same word, same Hebrew word, to talk about David's glory and honour. And she says, oh, how you've honoured yourself today, mate. What glory you've brought to our house and our God, the way you've behaved. Oh, what a king you are in what you do. She speaks about him constantly in the third person. She doesn't even speak directly as you. What's he done? I don't think it's just his dancing. It's not the dancing that is wrong. It's what happened as he was dancing. One Christmas day here, I dressed up in a nightshirt to tell a story of, the night before Christmas, whatever. And I was talking and acting and whatever. I didn't realise it was a little bit short. And I was putting up my hands and doing stuff. And then, I got this conscious, the people were maybe looking at the wrong spot. This is what happens to him. The ephod that he's wearing, the nightgown that the priests would wear, is a bit short. And as he jumps around, he exposes things that you don't want to expose. And she says, all the servants' wives, girls, their servants are looking out the window with me thinking, oh, look at that, you beauty. Did that really happen, or is that just what she says happened? Who knows? I'll leave you to your imagination. But she says, you're exposing yourself. Not just exposing what a crazy guy you are sexually exposing yourself to others. And that is shameful, especially in that culture. That is no way for a king to behave. I'm the daughter of Saul. I'm royalty. I understand the way you're supposed to conduct yourself. You're riffraff. You're a shepherd boy. You don't belong as king. You bring shame on us. That's why she reacts so strongly to him. He's nothing. He's shamed his position. And David comes back with the sarcasm that you see in dysfunctional marriages. They're not talking to each other, they're just hurling insults at each other, and he's just as sarcastic back. And he said, well, I'm going to expose myself to whoever I want to expose myself to. If you knew, like even the slave girls know, that I'm dancing for God, you shouldn't be ashamed, you should be proud. So I'll do what I like. Thank you very much. Because you're nobody. You're so dumb that you don't get what I'm doing. I will be as low and abased as anyone if I'm worshipping God, because it doesn't matter to me. I think there's something good in David's response, that all he cares about is what God thinks of him, but something rude and horrible in the way he speaks to his wife. David's always a mixed bag of a character, isn't he? There's a lot of hostility here. There's a lot of bitterness. What's she trying to do? She is trying to control him. She is trying to say, this is how you should respond to God and this is how you should not respond to God. She's been the gatekeeper. Churches are full of gatekeepers. This is what you should do and shouldn't do. That's appropriate and inappropriate. Paul wrote to the Corinthians about people who run around saying, don't eat, don't touch, don't taste, don't look. He says it sounds like wisdom, but it's not. It's the way of death. How we even respond to God in worship. We can try and control others. Yeah, I'll say this. A person left our church not so long ago, and the reason that they left was because they came to me and said, I want you to tell my daughter, adult daughter, that what she's doing is wrong. I said, well, no, that's not my place to do that. Like, you're a dad. And so he got disgruntled because he couldn't control his daughter and thought it was somehow my responsibility. Often pastors get told this. You should say to so-and-so this. And I think, well, you're going to tell them. When we can't control others, we try and get others to control others. He couldn't say, I'm leaving because you don't do what I want you to do. He said, your church no longer teaches the Bible, by which he meant condemn people for the things that he didn't like. He wants to control. He wants to be like Michael. This is how you will respond to God, or not. We must be aware of that. We need to be wise. David wasn't wise. Like, he was doing things that can cause offence. So we do need to consider the perception and experience and impact on other people. But we shouldn't be fearful. We shouldn't control others. And I guess that's the theme that I see coming out here. We can quickly move from learning about God to limiting God, to telling other people about God, to controlling other people as they live with God. It's a slippery slope, and I think that's what this passage is about. We quickly end up judging others. Why? Because we are proud and think we know. Christian spirituality says, no, be humble. When you are humble, you will not then be judgmental. And when you are being judgmental, consider that probably the reason is your own pride. Something's offending your pride and what you want. It's about control and power. James says it really wonderfully about how our relationship with God and our attitude in ourself shapes how we behave towards others. He says, be wretched and mourn and weep. Express that you are needy and broken too. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. The one who speaks against a brother or sister judges the brother or sister, speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There's only one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. Leave it to God is your answer to that question, Clarence. Who are you to judge your neighbour? Don't take that position, but be humble in yourself. Look after yourself. Take responsibility for yourself. Don't try and control others. That's, I think, what this story is about. And this is God's core testimony. This is what God is doing as he brings his kingdom now. From this really weird story, we go to an even more weird story where God once again confines himself to a box. He limits himself to show his presence. It's a box of flesh. It's the man Jesus. And how does this man Jesus live? He lives humbly. He does things that people think no religious leader or teacher should do that. He hangs out with the wrong people. He hangs out with the sinful people. He parties. He eats. He drinks. Well, he's got a demon, they say. He forgives. He embraces. He hangs out with kids. He's not serious enough. He speaks to single women, divorced women. Oh, he's scandalous. He shouldn't expose himself to danger like that. It's shameful. And so they reject him. But that's what Jesus embraces. And that's the testimony of the cross. The picture there in that little box, and I picked that one because it's quite boxy, has the little loincloth. But you know that when people were crucified, there was no loincloth. They were naked. It was part of the shame. He embraces the shame because he says, this is who God is. And this is my way with you. Weakness, shame, I embrace it. I don't exert my power over others, but I invite. And so the public bringing of the kingdom of God brings the private and personal response. Let's remember the big picture of what God is doing and then respond as individuals to it. Does that make sense? Hopefully that's not too complicated a box of ideas. Any questions or comments before we wrap up? Yes. Fallen off, yeah. Picking it up. Yeah. I guess if you're the one leading and believing that God is here present, if something happens to stop the procession, you've got to say, well, this is a sign to us from God about what he wants. They didn't listen. God is saying, this is the wrong way. This is the wrong way. And as the guy who's been there with the ark for 20 years, he should have known this isn't right. But he didn't listen. How would they have picked it up? Well, maybe they would have got some poles from somewhere. Tom. Yep. Okay. So last week we spoke about influencing, not imposing, through invitation. They were 3 words that I used. So we do want to have an influence. We do want to see justice and peace and people behaving well with each other. But it's very hard to impose. And so as soon as you go down the road of power and imposition, it just inflames more conflict. So, to come back to Israel, horrendous things were done by some people acting out of horrible hatred and bitterness. But how do you respond to that? If it's just more violence and more suffering, is that not just going to nurture more hatred and bitterness? And where does that end? It's not a simple thing, and we shouldn't delude ourselves that it's an easy answer. How do we respond and stop bad behaviour? We do need to intervene, but in a way that's measured and thoughtful rather than revenge and bitterness and punishing. That's hard on an individual level. When you've been hurt, you want to strike back. You want justice done. It's hard on a national or a social level. It is really difficult. We shouldn't pretend that it's a simple thing. That's why we should pray for our leaders, because it requires great wisdom. The church has used its power. Baptist as a denomination, we come out of that very wrestle. That's where we come from in England, that people were not free to worship as they want. That's who we were. The early Baptists, ironically, were drowned for their faith. The people in power thought that was really clever. You want to baptise? There's an expression, that's what we're going to do to you to shut you up. Because Baptists said, no, there is a church and state should be separate from one another. Just because you're the king doesn't give you the right to tell people how to worship God. That's our history, that's our DNA. But it's a complex thing. And sometimes it ends up the way it ended up for Jesus, on a cross. And sometimes things aren't put right. There is ongoing injustice. That's why we say, Jesus, come and fix the world, because we can't fix it. Sometimes we need to suffer. I don't mean suffer to put up with a bad marriage and do nothing and just suck it up because that's what you should do. You speak up against injustice, but sometimes it doesn't work. And instead of hitting back, sometimes we need to say the world is broken. It's more broken than we admit in this lovely country that we live in. Someone else had a question over here. Yeah. 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 Oh, fantastic question. Yeah. I think I said last week, next year I want to do how do we read the Bible? Because there's dozens and dozens of these examples in our First Testament. You think, well, what do I do with this verse? You know, if people talk back to their parents, kill them, stone them. If you wear the wrong clothes, you know, you're depraved, you're evil. If you mix you know, if you cook your meat in the milk from the, you know, all these things, you think, what do I do with all that stuff? How do I read Scripture consistently? Or, you know, I think I mentioned it in